Alright, final video of the night. We've added mixed numbers. We've subtracted mixed numbers. Now we're going to kind of just go off of the subtracting mixed numbers to situations where you might have to borrow. Now, you might just need to see an example to see what we're talking about. So here's our problem. 3 1/2 minus 1 3/4. Still have to go through our steps like we normally would. Subtract the fractions first, then subtract the whole numbers. So let's start by getting those fractions off to the side, keeping them in the order that they're in. 1/2 is first, and the 3/4 is second. So we're going to subtract these. Denominators are not the same. We need to make them the same. We can't do anything until we have that done. 2 can go into 4. 2 times 2 gives you 4. So that's the magic number we need to multiply by. Accidentally wrote a 3. There we go. So we do 1/2. We need to multiply that whole fraction by 2. So the 1 times 2 gives you 2, and the 2 times 2 gives us the 4. The 3/4 stays the same and in the same spot. We normally would be okay to add here because our denominators are the same. We have 4s. But what we have is 2 minus 3. That gives you a negative number. If you have 2 and you go back 3, you go back to 1, you go back to 0, then you go to negative 1. We don't want anything to do with negative numbers. So this is where we need to borrow. Now let's go ahead though and subtract those whole numbers. Then we'll do our borrowing. Ugh. 3 minus 1. Our whole numbers. Gives you 2. Now we need to borrow from that 2. Kind of like when you borrow original subtraction problems, you take 1 away. Okay, so we're going to take 1 away from that 2, and we're going to make it 1 less. Just a 1 now. Now we're not just going to be putting like a 1 in front of any of these numbers though. They're fractions. Think to yourselves. Both our denominators are 4s. So what would the numerator have to be for that fraction to equal 1? You should know this. The numerator should be the same as your denominator. So if the denominator is 4, the numerator should be 4. 4/4 is equal to 1. So we're not just going to be adding 1 up here, we're going to be adding 4/4. We're just changing that 1 into the fraction. So right here, our 2/4, we're going to add that 4/4. Okay, so 4/4 plus 2/4. Denominators already should be the same for us. So we just go ahead and add the top numbers. 4 plus 2 gives you 6. And your denominator stays the same. Don't go adding those denominators. We don't ever do that. We don't ever add them. We don't ever subtract them. When we get them the same, we leave them the same. Now, that 3/4 goes second again. We should see that we're good to subtract now because our denominators are the same like they were here, but this time we can take 3 away from 6. We couldn't take 3 away from that 2 when we only had 2/4. So 6 minus 3 is 3, and the 4 stays the same, 3/4. So this is our fraction, and if you remember back at our whole number, we were only left with 1. It was 2, but then we had to borrow right there. and we made it into the fraction instead of just a 1, equivalent. Kind of like the dollar bill and the 4 quarters. They look different. They're really the same. So we put that whole number and that fraction back together. Grand finale, there you go. 1 3/4 is your final answer. Maybe you got it. Maybe you don't. We're going to do another example. So if you do got it, might as well just shut the video off instead of listening to me blamble on, and go ahead and get back to your work. Otherwise, stay here and we'll go over another one. Alrighty, so for this next example, we're going 4 1/3 minus 2 2/6. Now, we're going to make that 2/3. Yeah, we'll do that. Alrighty. So, first step, separate the fractions. Keep them in that order as they appear on here. So we have the 1/3 first and the 2/3 second. They already have the same denominator. Otherwise, we would have to do what we needed to do to make them have the same. But they already have the same, so we're good. We should be ready to subtract, except if I have 1, I can't take 2 away from that. That goes back to 0, then all the way back to -1. Don't want negatives. So we should be able to see here that we can't do this. We'll have to borrow. So let's skip ahead to our second step and then we'll come on back. So our second step is subtracting those whole numbers you see. So taking that 4 and that 2 and subtracting those. Okay. Gives us 2. Now we're going to have to take 1 away from that because we're going to need that over here to help us subtract our fractions. So that 2, knock it down to a 1. So we're going to borrow that 1, put it over here. But remember, we don't want to leave it as just a 1. We want to change it into the fraction. We're dealing with fractions, change our 1 to fractions even, a fraction. So if we look at our denominators, we're wanting to work in thirds. So that 1 should have a denominator of 3. Hopefully you got this down because we worked so much on this before. But if you have the same number on top and bottom, it equals 1. So if you're wondering what this is, it should just be that same number that we have there on the bottom. So this 1 that we borrowed from over here, we're going to make that 3/3, which is 1. Just looks different. Okay, so that 1/3, we're going to go ahead and add our 3/3 to that 1/3. We're going to beef that fraction up so we actually can go ahead and take 2/3 away from it. So right now, I need to do 3/3 plus 1/3, which would give us 4/3. Now that 2/3 we can just copy back down, and let's see if we're ready to subtract. Yeah, we look good. Denominators are still the same. And also important, this first number is larger than that second number. So 4, we can take 2 from that. 4 minus 2 is 2. Denominator stays the same. So we end up with 2/3 as our fraction part of our answer. If we go back to our whole number here, 4 minus 2 gave us 2. But since we borrowed, we had to knock it down to 1. So our whole number part of our answer is just 1. Combine those two up for your final answer. 1 2/3 is your final answer. So go ahead and try this out. If you need to, go back and replay it. Okay, sometimes it takes us more than one time hearing it, seeing it, doing it in order for it to stick in our brain. Okay, so please go ahead, try out some problems, or replay the video or parts of the video where you might need to clarify more. Thank you.